Hi guys, I'm going to go over the things you need to know for the scientific method test that we've got coming up. So first of all, you need to know the variables, so the elements of experiments, okay? So the independent variable, remember I asked you to circle the I when we wrote this down because it's the thing that I change, okay? Independent variable is the thing that I change. So, for example, let's talk about the gobstopper lab we did. We put different gobstoppers in different liquids. Let's say, for example, that someone is doing the gobstopper lab and they have room temperature water in one beaker, they have hot water in another beaker, and then cold water in the third beaker, and they put one gobstopper in each beaker all at the same time, and then they measure which one dissolves faster. It's kind of similar to what we did in class. In that case, their independent variable, the thing that I change, would be the temperature of the water, okay? Because they are using different temperatures of water, but they're not changing anything else. They're using the same color gobstoppers, the same amount of water, everything else is the same. It's just the temperature of the water that they're changing, and the independent variable is the thing that we change, okay? The dependent variable is the thing that we measure. So in the gobstopper lab, we were measuring how fast it dissolved, okay? We were measuring that by observing it and seeing if it changed color because it was losing layers, right? So how fast it dissolves, that is our dependent variable because that is the thing we're measuring, okay? The control group is the original unchanged group that we're not doing anything different with. So in this case, the control group would be the room temperature water because that's original, that's normal. Room temperature water is pretty normal, right? And then we're changing the hot water and the cold water. Those are our experimental groups. But the control group is the room temperature water because that's original, that's unchanged, that's pretty normal, right? Constants, a lot of people get confused with control groups, so make sure you know the difference between these two. Constants are things that we keep the same. So for example, the color of the gobstopper we're going to keep the same, just in case different colors dissolve more quickly than others. So we've got the colors the same. What else should be the same? The amount of water. So the amount of water will be the same. Probably the source you get the water from. So if you get some water from the tap, you probably want to get it all from the same tap, just in case there's different minerals or something, right? In case that would affect it. So maybe the water source you'd want to keep constant. If you're going to stir it, you would want to stir them all the same. I would say probably don't stir them just so that doesn't mess it up. But if you're going to stir one of them 5 times, all 3 of them have to be stirred 5 times, right? So the amount of stirring. Also, I don't have room to write this, but the type of liquid would need to be the same. So we wouldn't want to do room temperature water and then hot Sprite or something because the liquid needs to be the same. So they would all need to be water because what we're changing is the temperature. We're not changing the liquid that it's in, right? So we want to keep everything else constant except the temperature of the water, okay? So those are some of the things you need to know for your test. You also need to know how to graph things. So I'm going to show you how to graph real quick. Let me switch my board. Okay, so first I'm going to show you how to do a bar graph. Here's my data. I just made this up. Let's imagine this is our data, okay? So we've got the temperature of the water, the independent variable, we've got room temperature, cold water, and hot water. Then we've got the amount of layers lost in 10 minutes. So we started all the gobstoppers at the same time, we timed it for 10 minutes, and we measured how many layers it lost each time, okay? So I'm going to start by making a bar graph. Okay, so when we're doing graphs, the x-axis is the horizontal one, y-axis is the vertical one. We always put the thing we change on the x-axis. So in this case, the thing we change, the independent variable, is the temperature of the water. That's what we're changing here. So that goes on the x-axis. So I'm going to put temperature of water. Okay, and since I'm doing a bar graph, I'm going to label each of the 3 bars I'm going to make, okay? So I'm going to make 1 bar for each temperature, and I got to label each of the 3 bars I'm going to make. So I'll do one for room temperature, one for cold water, and one for hot water. I'm going to draw the bars later once I do my scale on the y-axis. So the y-axis is going to be the thing we measure. In this case, we are measuring the amount of layers that we lost in 10 minutes. So I'm going to label that on my y-axis. Okay, so I wrote amount of layers lost right there on my y-axis. Now, I need to come up with a good scale for my y-axis. I don't need a scale for the x in a bar graph because I'm just labeling the bars. I already labeled them. But I do need a scale for my y data. My smallest number is 3 and my biggest number is 8. So I'm thinking a good scale might be to go by 1s in this case. You could also go by 2s, you could go by 5s, 10s. If you have big enough data, you could even go by hundreds. But in this case, we can just go by 1s. So I'm going to label from 0 to 1. Or, not from 0 to 1. I'm going to go from 0 to 8 by 1s. And I could go higher than 8 if I wanted, but I'm good to just go to 8 because that's how big my data is. Now, the first bar, my room temperature one, is it lost 5 layers in 10 minutes. So I'm going to have my bar go up to 5. I'm going to start where I marked room temperature, and I'm going to draw a bar that goes up to 5. Shade that in a little bit so we can see how many layers it lost in the room temperature water, okay? In the cold water, you can see it lost 3 layers, hypothetically. So I'm going to draw my bar up to the 3 where I've labeled it cold, okay? And I'm going to do kind of a different pattern in there so we can tell those bars apart. And then the hot water, in my hypothetical results, it lost 8 layers. So the hot water bar, I'm going to go up to the 8, which is about to there. And I'm going to do slightly different shading in that one. Okay, so now we can see easily with our bar graph which temperature of water makes it lose layers more quickly. Our bar graph is missing one thing, and that's a title. So for the title, we try and include the x and the y-axis titles both in our main title, okay? So we might put something like amount of layers lost versus temperature of water. I'm not going to write that whole thing because I don't want you to have to watch me write forever, but that would be a good main title, including the x and the y axes in the main title. So like I said, amount of layers lost versus temperature of water would be a good main title for this, okay? So now I'm going to show you how to do a line graph. This is the last thing you need to know, okay? I'm going to use this same data to do my line graph, except for instead of using hot, cold, and room temperature, I'm going to use their numbers in Celsius. Because if you're doing a line graph, you want to have numbers on both sides. Okay, so let me erase this bar graph I've got real quick. And let's do our line graph. So again, the horizontal one is x. The up and down one, the vertical one, is our y-axis. Now we have the same data, but this time we're going to use the numbers for our temperatures instead. So the thing we change, the independent variable, is what goes on the x-axis. The temperature is what we change. So I'm going to put the temperature of water on the x-axis. And the thing we measure is what goes on the y. So in this case, we were measuring how many layers the gobstoppers lost in 10 minutes. So I'm going to label that on my y. Okay, and notice I left myself some space so I can add some numbers in there on my scale, okay? So looking at my data, let's look at the x data first. Here we go. So for our x data, we've got our smallest number is 7 for the cold water, 7 degrees Celsius, and then our largest number is 50 degrees Celsius for hot water. Okay, so I'm thinking a good scale I could do might be by 5s or 10s. So I'm going to go ahead and do it by 10s, but 5s would also be a good option. So I'll do 10, starting at 0. I don't need to go higher than 50 because 50 is my highest number in my data, so I'm good to go there. Now let's decide what to do for our y-axis, the up and down. When our smallest number is 3 and our biggest number is 8, I'm going to go by ones again, just like I did on my bar graph. And again, I don't need to go higher than 8 because my highest number in that data is 8. Okay, so now instead of doing bars, I'm going to do dots, okay? So my first point, I've got 20 degrees Celsius and it lost 5 layers. So I'm going to start at 20 on my x-axis, which is right there, and I'm going to go up to, how many? 5. I'm going to go up to 5. So I'm going to trace it up. I'm going to draw a dotted line so you can see what I'm doing. See how they meet there? I've got 20 traced up to where it meets 5. Then I'm going to make a dot there. You don't need to draw these dotted lines. I just draw them so you can see what I'm doing, okay? But you don't need those. All right, so our next point is going to be, we got 7 degrees Celsius and it lost 3 layers. So I'm going to start at the 7, which is going to be before the 10, about here-ish. I'm just estimating, okay? 7, and I'm going to go up to the 3. So I'm going to draw my dotted line up to where it meets the 3. And I'm going to make a dot there. Again, you don't need those dotted lines. I just draw them so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, now our last point is the hot water, which is 50 degrees Celsius, and it lost 8 layers. So I'm going to find the 50 degrees Celsius, and I'm going to go up to the 8, okay? I'm going to draw dotted lines so you can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to make a dot there. Again, you don't need those dotted lines, okay? Okay, we've got our points. Now I'm going to connect them with a line. And there we go. We've got our line graph. Okay, so you can see as we're looking at this graph, as the temperature increases, the amount of layers the gobstopper loses also increases, right? Because where the temperature is the highest, the amount of layers it lost is also the highest, right? And then the colder the temperature, the less layers it loses. So anyway, our graph is missing one thing, and that's a title. Remember, with the main title, try to use both axis titles. So I might put something like temperature of water versus amount of layers lost, just like we did on our bar graph. I'm not going to write it out, but that would be a good main title for this graph, okay? So I hope that was helpful. Please let me know if you have other questions. I'd love to help you, and good luck on the test.